Okay, hello, and thank you for joining the webinar today. I'm Miriam Eljan. I'm the program director for the NCI Predoc to Postdoc Transition Award that we are presenting today. I'll be giving the first talk in the first 30 minutes. I'm joined by my director, Dr. Oliver Bogler, who is the director of the Center for Cancer Training, and he'll be giving the second talk. Okay. Why isn't this? Okay. First, before we start talking about the program, I have some housekeeping information. The recording and slides with transcripts from today's webinar will be added to the F99 website under resources. Please turn off your video to save the bandwidth for the webinar. Everybody is muted, so please do not unmute yourself so that we do not have interruptions of the webinar. Please write down your questions. Do not send them in the chat box right away. But if they are not answered by the end of the second of the two talks, use the chat box to type them. We will try to answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A session after the second talk. If a question is not clear, we will ask the person to unmute him or herself to clarify. All right, first I'll be giving a background about the program, then the timeline, who is eligible for the program, some information about the funding mechanism, the nomination process, and some special application instructions. First, for the newcomers to the NIH system, the NCI is the National Cancer Institute, which is the oldest institute in the center and centers that comprise the NIH. FOA means Funding Opportunity Announcement, which is the generic term used for all type of funding mechanisms offered at by the NIH. RFA means Request for Applications. The F99 K00 FOA is an RFA. This means that it has special terms like only one annual submission date and a nomination letter, among others. The NRSA refers to the National Research Service Awards. These are congressionally mandated fellowships offered by NIH, such as F30, F31, and F32. The F99 K00 that we are talking about today is not an NRSA fellowship. Like all federal government agencies, the NIH fiscal year starts on October 1st and ends on September 30. I'm sorry, what's going on today? First, a bit of background information on why NCI developed this funding program. Currently, there is a significant imbalance between the number of biomedical trainees and the available tenure-track faculty positions. And there is an imbalance between the number of biomedical researchers and available research grants. One of the many consequences of this imbalance is that bright individuals are opting for careers outside the academic research. The F99 K00 program is an effort by the NCI leadership to explore innovative ideas to address this problem. NCI hopes that this dual-phase transition award will identify and encourage outstanding graduate students to commit to pursuing independent cancer research career by facilitating their joining top labs in the cancer field and make them more competitive for the K99 R00 award. More importantly, we hope to show to the awardees and their peers that NCI supports a tractable career path for the talented and committed scientists. This dual funding mechanism is composed of the F99, which provides support for 1 to 2 years to complete the PhD dissertation. The postdoc phase, which is the K00 phase, provides support for up to 4 years. These two phases are intended to be continuous in time. The transition takes place when the dissertation research is complete. The funding for the F99 phase will not be extended beyond 2 years. NCI is committed to renew the F99 K00 for the next 5 years. The fiscal year 2021 RFA is similar to that year, to last year, but different from other years. So it is very important to read it carefully and not rely solely on experience with a prior year's announcements. Non-compliant applications will be administratively withdrawn. If you know an awardee from prior years and plan to model your application on theirs, keep this in mind. This has 1 receipt date per year, not like the NRSA fellowship, which has 3. The RFA will be published hopefully this week. Applications will be due November 18th. The NCI website has a page devoted to the F99 K00 that is updated for each year's new RFA, and that's where you registered for the webinar. Review occurs in March by a special emphasis panel at NCI. The exact date is not determined yet, but you should see it in your ERA comments. And the results go to the May Council. Final selection of applications for funding will occur by the end of June. And the awards must have a start date of August 1st. What happens next if you receive this award? During the F99 phase, you have maximum 2 years to complete your dissertation research and secure a cancer-focused postdoc position. In year 1, you come to an NCI F99 Fellows meeting. NCI will not approve transitions to the K00 phase before February 1st of the first year award. That means you need to be minimum 6 months in the F99 phase. Contact the program director, which is currently myself, 9 months before you are ready to graduate and move on, for advice on the K00 transition process and application, which will be submitted by the postdoc institution. Details are in the RFA. Then you graduate with your PhD, you start your new postdoc position and conduct the research and career development activities planned for the K00 phase. Who is eligible for this program? The intended applicants are PhD or doctoral research degree students who are in their 3rd or 4th year of the doctoral program and are within 2 years of finishing their dissertation. The program year is calculated from the time of initial enrollment in the program and not after you start your dissertation project or join a lab or pass a candidacy exam. Dual degree or professional doctoral/clinical degree students are not eligible. And the reason is that their training timeline is not compatible with this new funding mechanism. There is only 1 nominee per degree granting institution per year. There is only 1 nominee for all schools and all colleges or divisions of a single institution, even if they have individual DUNS number. If you mainly work at a non-academic research center, you must apply through the institution that will confer your degree, but the research center can co-nominate you and contribute to the application. For international students studying in the US and who are on a visa are eligible for this program. No resubmissions are allowed, but someone may be nominated 2 years in a row if he or she still meets the eligibility requirement. Are there exceptions to the eligibility rule? Yes. Some examples are documented leave of absence, for example, family leave, but not for a vacation, or circumstances beyond your control, like a first advisor leaving the institution. But know that if you are selected, the institutional nomination letter will need to document these special circumstances. Feel free to contact me in advance before you put your name in for consideration at your institution. Similarly, some students already have advanced degrees, such as a master's degree, or they are truly speeding through the program, which means they are 2nd year. in both cases, and plan to be finished by year 4. If you can convince your selection committee that you are the best and you can finish in 2 years, NCI will accept your application. Again, the nomination letter should explain the special circumstances. Remember that the 2 phases are intended to be continuous and that the F99 funding will not be extended beyond 2 years. The NIH does not allow 2 applications with substantial overlap to be under review at the same time. So if a nominee submits an F99 K00 application in November, he or she cannot submit an F31 application for the December 8 deadline. This award is intended for students who are near the end of their dissertation. And so they really should be beyond the stage of intending to submit an F31. However, for those who still wish to submit an F31 after the F99 has been submitted, we advise you to wait until August, unless your summary statement is issued before April 8. This gives time to the F99 K00 summary statement to be released, which will allow you to submit the F31 application. Your application will be reviewed by an NCI panel. How is the award structured financially? The pre-doc F99 phase will give support for up to 2 years, but will not be extended, as I mentioned already, because this is really important. So you need to graduate by July 31st, 2023, and be ready to transition to the postdoc by August 1st of that year. In the K00 postdoc phase, you are an employee with full benefits. This slide and the FOA give you details of what to expect budget-wise in both phases. You may do your postdoc at the NIH or other national labs, but if you do, the funding will come from a different source. The F99 uses the same SF424 fellowship application package that is used for other fellowships, including the F31 NRSA pre-doc fellowship. But there are some key differences from the F31. A nomination letter is required and must be included as part of the application. I will add some more details about the nomination letter later. Fellowship application section has modified instructions. The special aim and research strategy section of the F99 do not use the typical research grant format, and I will elaborate more in a few minutes. Also, the review criteria are different from the F31. Some general guidance. You must read the RFA instructions in section 4, which is the application and submission information, very carefully. There is a hierarchy to instructions for applying to the NIH. First, there is the NIH application guide, which gives generic instructions. Then there are specific instructions for various types of applications, such as individual fellowships have their own section. And then there is the funding opportunity announcement, in this case, the RFA CA20048. If there is different advice offered, remember that the RFA overrules the application guide. Follow the RFA. Reference letters. You cannot reuse letters for a different or from prior applications. You must get new reference letters every time. Tell your referee to enter the FOA number as CA-20-048. There is no RFA there in there. Referees should not be directly involved in the application. They cannot be sponsors or co-sponsors. Check the status often. Late reference letters are not accepted. It is your responsibility to follow up with the referees. But if the 3 required letters are missing, the application will not be reviewed. The SF200. This form is often called the cover sheet. It is 2 pages. Your application will be a new application, even if you applied last year. Please request the maximum time allowed, which is 6 years, which includes 2 years for the F99 and 4 years for K00. I have the date listed on the slide. The NIH issues grants in 1 year block, and you don't want to run short if you need an extra day or an extra month to finish the F99 phase. You can always finish early. F220, which is the research and related other projects information form. In this form, the forms in this section are all about your current university and your current project, not the postdoc K00 phase. The subsection 1 and 2, in this subsection 1 and 2, this section starts with human subject and vertebrate animals. These are basic yes or no questions. But in a later section, the F500 and F430, there are more parts. I will give some advice at the end of my presentation. For subsection 6, which is international activities, although foreign institutions are not allowed to apply, foreign components are permitted. So if you have a foreign collaborator, collaborators, list them here. Subsection 12, which is other attachment. This is where the nomination letter goes and nothing else. I will give some more details in the next pages, slides. Each institution manages its own nomination process to select its nominee with the lead time needed to craft a solid proposal. The nomination process is handled by the institution based on faculty inputs. The nomination letter must include a description of the nomination process, which includes who manages the process, how are eligible students informed, what are the nature of the required documents, the review process, and the decision-making process. The nomination letter must be no longer than 2 pages. It should be signed by the head of the graduate program and the institutional grants official. This guards against there being multiple nominees from the same institution. If the dissertation work involves more than one institution, for example, if you are doing research at a center that does not offer a formal degree, we encourage you to submit a joint nomination letter from both program heads. The nomination letter should confirm eligibility, that the nominee is in the 3rd or 4th year of the PhD program in an appropriate biomedically related field. The nominee is not required to be doing cancer research in the F99 phase, but must propose doing cancer-focused research for the K00 phase. If an eligibility exception was requested and granted by the NCI, the nomination letter should mention the reason. If the nominee is in the US on a visa, the letter should also give assurance that the candidate's visa status is up to date, that there are no known obstacles for completing the F99 phase or for obtaining a visa at the time of the K00 transition. One example of a common obstacle for the K00 phase is a home country requirement to return after the PhD is awarded, but do not include the visa in the application. The Form F230. For those doing all of their research in their degree granting university, this part is straightforward. For others, a second performance site should be added. The primary site should be where most of the work will be done. A human subject and vertebrate animal approvals must be for each site where the work will be done. Form F240. Under key personnel, you must list yourself and your sponsor. I will give some advice about the Biosketch in the next slide. For the co-sponsors, reviewers look to see if their role is substantive and well-defined in the proposal. Do not include the co-sponsor just to have one or just because they are famous. If your sponsor has limited mentoring experience, a co-sponsor who has an established track record of mentoring graduate students might help your case, but only if the person meets with you regularly and is highly engaged in your training plan. Biosketches are required for all senior and key personnel and other significant contributors. Be sure to use the most recent Biosketch format and make sure your Biosketch shows the date you started your PhD program. Fellowship applicants may include manuscripts in preparation or submitted or in revisions. These carry less weight with reviewers, but still include them. If one of these gets published and there are more than 30 days before the actual review date, you may submit an update to the scientific review officer who runs the review meeting. You may also use an update to report any positive changes in sponsor funding, which is a new grant, since reviewers weigh this heavily when evaluating your sponsor. For the personal statement, briefly describe why you are well suited for your role in this project. It helps if the sponsor and other key personnel customize their personal statement to their role in this application. Don't just use their research biosketch. If there are factors affecting your past productivity that you wish to explain, such as family care responsibilities, illness, military service, you may address them in your personal statement. Indicate if you have published or created research product under other names. For the contribution to science, briefly describe up to 5 of your most significant contributions to science. While all applicants may describe up to 5 contributions, graduate students are encouraged to consider highlighting 2 or 3 they consider most significant. For the research supports or scholastic performance section, in this section, pre-doc applicants provide information about their grades. F430. Finally, this is the meat of the application. I will go over the parts that are in red in some details. My advice is to carefully read the RFA instructions and the review criteria before writing this part. First, this slide shows the major components of the fellowship application versus the R1 application. Your sponsor is used to focusing on the research strategy in an R1 application, but training grants devote about half of their space to the applicant and the career development, as you can see on the left side. 6 pages for the application section and 6 pages for the research strategy. The fellowship application, which is the first part of the F430 section. Develop this in collaboration with your sponsor, but it should be written by you. Be sure to include both research and career development activity for the entire award period, both phases. Allotting 100% of your time only to research is probably not a good idea, but neither is allotting only 60%. Under the application background and goal for the fellowship training, for the doctoral dissertation and research experience, summarize all of your research experience in chronological order. Include the area studied and conclusions drawn. For the training goals and objectives, describe your long-term career goal, the training goals for each phase, and explain how this award will enable the attainment of these goals. How will you identify the K00 mentor? Discuss how the proposed research will facilitate your transition from the F99 to K00 and beyond. For the third part, which is the activities planned under this award, describe the scientific and professional development activities planned for each phase and explain how the activities will facilitate the transition to each subsequent career stage. Let's turn to the research training plan, which includes section 5, 6, and 8 that follow normal guidance. So I don't have much specific instructions about that. For the specific aims and research strategy, these have some special instructions that I will go over. The typical nominee is far along in their defined dissertation research project, but has yet not committed to a specific postdoc lab. This presents a challenge for writing a traditional research training plan. NCI does not want to prolong the time to a degree by having applicants propose additional new experiments for the F99 phase. And applicants are not yet in a position to write a detailed research proposal for the K00 phase. So to address this, NCI requires that all applications use these two specific aims in the following way. Think of aim 1 as setting up the dissertation's specific hypothesis and objectives that will be used to examine the hypothesis and the preliminary data, and then describing the methods and techniques to be used for the remaining experiments. Add a discussion of the expected outcome, possible problems, and how they will be managed, and when appropriate, alternative approaches that might be tried if the initial approaches do not work. For aim 2 should not be a continuation of the PhD research, unless you plan to take on a whole new aspect of the project. For example, a physicist might propose to work on the biology of the same project for his or her postdoc phase. Reviewers look for training potential, and the need for additional training. That's hard to do if you merely continue your PhD project. So the NCI strongly recommends that Predoc move to a new institution for the postdoc phase. The research strategy section. This section has two components, significance and approach. The innovation is not required for fellowships. The combination of plans for the PhD and postdoc phase should prepare the applicant for a career as an independent investigator in cancer research. There should be a logical and compelling connection between the phases and aims, and they should support the career goals. The application title, the project summary, and the project narrative should reflect both dissertation project and postdoctoral plans. Do not neglect aim 2. I recommend at least 2 pages. Remember that the K00 phase makes up 2/3 of the funding period, so do not skimp on this part just because you don't have a defined postdoc project. The third part of the F430 form is the sponsor, collaborator, and consultant section. The sponsor statement is written by your sponsor and co-sponsor. There are 5 parts. One of them is the research support available. List all current and pending research support specifically available for this particular training fellowship. If the sponsor's research support will end prior to the end of the proposed training period, or sponsor has no funding currently, the sponsor should provide a contingency plan for how the fellowship research will be supported. Be sure all of the sections support the same overall story. Disconnects between the applicant and support sections generally review very badly. The review criteria. This is how review works. 3 reviewers are assigned to your application. Each provide a number from 1 to 9, with 1 is the best, for the 5 individual review criteria listed here. And then they provide a preliminary overall impact score. This happens before the study section meets. The overall score is not an average of the 5 individual review criteria. When the discussion in the study section is over, each member, not just the 3 assigned reviewers, each member of the study section in the room votes on a final impact score. Those final scores are eventually averaged and multiplied by 10, and that is the score that you receive. For the sponsor and mentor section, the biosketch and current sponsor statements are important, but also the plan to review to identify a good K00 mentor. and how you describe the type of mentor and institution you seek for the K00 phase. For the evaluation of the research training plan, reviewers want details and milestones for both phases. Remember, it's both phases. Use your timeline in the fellowship applicant section wisely to reinforce the research plan and integrate it with professional development activities. For the evaluation of training potential or developmental plan, evaluate plans to monitor the progress in research and career development for both phases, and the professional skills milestones for transitioning to K00. For the institutional environment, there is a specific section about the F99 phase, but when scoring, reviewers also evaluate the postdoctoral plan. Reviewers want to see your ambition here to reach out to the best mentor in the best institution. The F99 K00 is an elite program meant to pick those who want to excel in the next phase. But you do not need to be at a high-powered lab or institution for your PhD to get an award. And finally, the vertebrate, animal, and human subjects research. These two sections, if reviewers raise concerns, this will hold up the award. I want to go back to the vertebrate animals, just to make sure. If you are using xenograph, your research maybe you have to identify the source of human tissue, and this might qualify your project as human subject research. For the human subject research, also the same issue. If reviewers raise concerns, this will hold up your award. Just a little note about the human subjects. There are some common mistakes that show up frequently. First, who is an investigator? Individuals who provide coded information or specimens and collaborate on other activities related to the research or training are considered to be involved in the research. This includes providers who will be co-authors. If any investigator has access to the personal identifiable information, the fellowship will be considered human subject research, even if the applicant does not have access to the personal identifiable information. Human samples and data from deceased individuals is not human subject research. Also, human tissue and data that come de-identified from a tissue bank or data bank respectively, where the bank is prohibited from releasing the personal identifiable information, it is not human subject research. However, if these data or sample have been collected from live people specifically for this project, this is human subject research. And my last slide is for the website where you registered for the webinar, and it will be updated with the new funding with the new RFA that we are hoping that will be published this week. We are hoping that, underline hoping, because it's not up to us. The NIH has to process and approve that request. And there will be the slides and the audio will be posted on the website. And thank you for your attention. Oliver, you can, do I need to do anything? I stopped sharing.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for your presentation, Miriam. I'm going to follow up with a brief presentation with some general comments about grantsmanship. And if you can pass me the presenter, please, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let me see if I can get my slides up. Thank you very much. So I'll go through these relatively quickly so that we have plenty of time for Q&A. But I wanted to make some general comments. Now, some of these, the F99 mechanism has some specific characteristics, as you just heard from Dr. Eljan. So some of these general comments might not be 100% relevant, but I think they're good for you to think about as you progress in your career of independent cancer research. So the training and career development awards that NCI offers can have a profound impact on your training and the the progress you make through these different stages, including the F99 K00 award that we're talking about today. But we do have additional awards that cover different career stages, and I encourage you to become knowledgeable about those as well. These awards facilitate your movement from where you are now to where you want to be. They help you develop your scientific career, and they emphasize the research, but also the training elements, as you've already heard. As you think about these awards, and this one in particular, you need to sort of consider what stage in your career you're at, what your research focus is, your experience, institutional commitment, your needs, the effort that you can commit. And some of our mechanisms have restrictions on citizenship. And then, as you already heard from Miriam in some detail, each of these mechanisms has their own requirements and provisions, and some of them are listed here, but the website that Miriam just ended with is an important resource for you to really look at in details, and of course her slides have a lot of that information on as well. I wanted to just say a couple of things about the different elements. Again, the F99 is a little bit different, but and the specific aims page is a little prescribed here, because the first part, the first aim is about your graduate work, the second aim about your postdoctoral work, but it is nevertheless, I think, the most important page in your grant submission. It is probably the only page that non-assigned reviewers will read as they convene together in a study section. If someone wants to really understand a proposal, they almost inevitably turn towards the specific aims page and try to see the summary of it there. So spend some time making sure this is cogent and well written. Should be written for a scientist, but not necessarily an expert in the specific domain that you're working in. I would recommend that you use very clear language, short declarative sentences. That don't put any references here. Don't use any jargons or acronyms. Clearly state the hypotheses that you're testing in your graduate work, and what you might do in your postdoctoral phase. Ensure that the experiments that you're proposing test this hypothesis. That the proposals aren't primarily technology driven. And that the elements in the research are interdependent, but not sort of dependent on each other, so that if there's if some of the things you're proposing don't work, that doesn't bring the entire structure down. So it's worth spending the time and making this a really crisp page of writing. When you're talking about yourself in the application, I think it's important to not just reiterate what might be in your biosketch already. I think most reviewers, most humans respond well to narrative. So telling a little bit about the story of who you are in terms of your professional training path, your goals, telling the reviewers a little bit about the why, and not just the what of what you've done. Include information that isn't just readily available in the biosketch already. Put your best self forward. This is not a time for modesty. You're competing with peers. You need to show your strengths so that the reviewers can properly understand them. And then it's worth spending some time on the training program itself, selecting mentors and advisory committee, self-identify deficiencies in your training and address them with workshops or courses or other things, collaborations, to show how this training grant that you're applying for will round out your education and capabilities and get you to where you want to be. So if you articulate a clear career goal, I want to be an independent investigator in this particular area using this sort of class of approaches or methodologies or what have you. I want to work on skin cancer using genetic mouse models and look at the epigenetics of the disease, something like that. And then explain how, maybe you already know how to use mouse models, but you have never done any epigenetics. So you're going to look for a postdoc in that domain, something like that. So indicate how this grant will maximize your chances of becoming that independent investigator. The research strategy, again, it's a little bit different, but when you do describe the studies you're proposing, again, it's important to lead off with an introduction to set the context of the work that you're proposing. This is really much more like a manuscript introduction. It's not really a literature review. The goal here is not to be exhaustive and fair and deeply analytical about your field. It's really what is it that the reader needs to know in order to understand the context in which you're working. What you write here leads the reader to your hypothesis. It might demonstrate a conversation in the field if there's a particular area where people have perhaps opposing views and critical experiments are being done and you're contributing to this. It demonstrates that a critical question is being asked and hopefully answered, right? So the reviewers want to feel that you're in the thick of it and not at some sort of peripheral backwater of your field. You're doing important work right in the heart of that. So, and again, the hypothesis or hypotheses that you articulate, they have to sort of be the connective tissue for all of this, all of these things. In terms of the approach, the studies that you propose, you have to, if it's particularly if the technology or the approaches you're using are complex or cutting edge, the question of can you do this work that you're proposing will come up. So anything you can show to address that. Maybe you have some data. Maybe the laboratory you're working in has some data, or you will build a collaboration with someone. Again, in the K00 phase, you're writing more hypothetically, but you can imagine, for example, to go back to the example I just mentioned. I want to learn epigenetics, and therefore I will apply to laboratories that do epigenetic research for my postdoc, excuse me, and seek collaborations for skin cancer models or something along those lines. It shows your contribution to the work. Feasibility I've already addressed. Also, the scope of what you're proposing has to be doable in the requested period of funding. So that's another critical thing. If you're looking at some of the R01 type applications that your mentor might be writing, that is a much larger scope of work that represents the work of typically several people, 2-3 people perhaps over 5 years. That's a much larger scope than what you're talking about here. Really the work of a single individual over, maybe over a similar time frame altogether, but still one person, not several. Hypothesis-based, not tech-driven. So don't propose studies just in order to apply a technology that you want to learn. It's fine to learn a technology and apply it, but it has to be in the service of an important question that has a hypothesis. As I've already mentioned, innovative and feasible. If it's very innovative, preliminary data, whether it be your own or that of a colleague in your lab, is going to be helpful. The study shouldn't be descriptive. Nothing just to search out things you're trying to test. Again, a question focused. You have to have controls. This seems obvious, but often they're missed out. Sections on statistics to show how you're going to evaluate your data. And I think, as Miriam already mentioned, the idea of assuming that every study that you propose will be a rousing success is not going to resonate with your reviewers. So be ready to discuss potential pitfalls and propose some alternative approaches that you could use if things don't go the way that you would hope they will. So sometimes in a review, people talk about fatal flaws that they see. And here are some of the most classic ones in sort of training, in the training arena. Lacks relevant significance to the field, so is not an important question, isn't innovative, isn't hypothesis driven, is poorly written. I can't emphasize that too much. A well-written application will not make up for uninteresting science or a poor training plan. But even the most brilliant science and the most well thought out training plan can be harmed severely by poor writing. And by what do I mean by poor writing? Just writing that's hard to understand. So that's convoluted, that's grammatically incorrect, that maybe has poor punctuation, all these kinds of things. So think of the reviewer as reading your application in a moment of stress and pressure and time. They may not devote as much time to it as they would like, and they're trying to really extract the meaning. If you're making them work really hard, you're potentially harming yourself. The experimental approach, I've already mentioned it. It's a little bit of a Goldilocks situation. It shouldn't be too much. It shouldn't be too little. It should be just right. One way to get a feeling for that is to look at some of the applications that have been funded in past years, or to talk to some of your mentors or peers. I've already talked about the dependence of aims or experiments on each other, and then the other 2 points as well. Detail of statistical analyses are important, and you have to anticipate results and think of alternative strategies if they don't work. Common issues that limit enthusiasm from reviewers: the training plan is too generic. If you can put someone else's name in the training plan and it still reads okay, then that's probably a sign that it's not really a plan about you. The more detailed, the better, the who, what, where, and when. These are all things to think about and to articulate. Reference letters need, if these are not glowing, that can harm you. So all the letters really need to be outstanding, and this is an area where you can strategize with your sponsor and think about who might be able to write letters for you, and try to pick wisely here. Pick people who understand your work, know your work, and who are positive about what you're doing. It's not a bad idea to try and understand a little bit about the study section. The faculty members who are going to convene in that committee to review your application, and their names are available on the NCI website. This mechanism is reviewed by a panel, a special emphasis panel that is convened once a year. So these lists are not generally available long before the meeting, but they are, I think, available. Appreciate again that these are busy people. Be considerate of their time, make their job as easy as possible with clarity and so on, and provide them the information they need for writing their review. So don't make them search things out. If there's a critical piece of evidence, don't just put a reference in. If you can put a figure in that even from a published paper, that might be really helpful to them to understand it. Make sure you attribute that correctly. Attributed that correctly, but don't make them search it out for themselves. I'm going to close just with a tool that you may not yet know, which is called NIH Reporter. This is a public website where you can search for all NIH-funded applications. It's sort of a competitive intelligence tool, if you will. So here on this particular screenshot, I have put in K99, but you could put F99 in. You can select the National Cancer Institute, and then you will get a list of funded grants for that mechanism, and you can click on their titles or their grant numbers and read their abstracts and find something out about them. So this is a way to take a look at what has previously been funded. You can also see their papers related to that and all kinds of other data that are public, but it gives you an opportunity to look at kind of what's out there, what's succeeded in the past, and that might be helpful to you. And I'm going to end there, and I think we're going to take some questions. So